In this video, we are going to know the summary of the Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne with visuals. So let's start. The story opens in the strict Puritan settlement of Boston in the 17th century, outside a grim wooden prison whose rusted iron door and weathered timbers already hint at the harsh justice practiced within. A crowd of stern townspeople gathers before this prison, and among the weeds growing at its threshold, the narrator notes a single wild rose bush, a small, almost tender detail suggesting that some gentleness might yet survive within so severe a community. From the prison door emerges a young woman named Hester Prynne, carrying an infant in her arms and wearing, embroidered in gold thread upon the breast of her gown, a scarlet letter A, marking her publicly as an adulteress. The crowd of Puritan women in the marketplace mutters harshly amongst themselves, several remarking that Hester has gotten off far too lightly and that a branding iron or even death would have suited her crime better, showing at once just how unforgiving the society intends to be toward her. Hester is led to the town scaffold, the traditional place of public punishment, and made to stand there for hours under the judgmental stares of the entire community, holding her baby, whom she has named Pearl, and enduring the shame alone, since the identity of the child's father has never been revealed, despite the magistrates and ministers repeatedly demanding she name him. While standing on the scaffold, Hester's eyes fall on a small, misshapen, elderly man at the edge of the crowd, a stranger to the town, who reacts to the sight of her with a flash of shock and anger quickly hidden behind the calm expression. This man, unbeknownst to the crowd, is Hester's own husband, a scholar who had sent her ahead to America years earlier while he settled his affairs in Europe, and who was long believed lost at sea after failing to follow her for so long. Later that day, this man visits Hester privately in her prison cell, disguised now as a physician and going by the assumed name Roger Chillingworth, so that his true identity and his humiliating connection to her will remain hidden from the town. He does not ask her to reveal her lover's name for the sake of restoring his own reputation, but instead vows quietly and coldly that he will discover the man's identity himself through patient observation, and that he will have his revenge without ever revealing himself as the wronged husband. He extracts a promise from Hester that she will keep his true identity a secret, a promise she reluctantly agrees to, sensing already the dark purpose settling over him. Hester is eventually released from prison, but is not permitted to leave the settlement, and she chooses to live in a small, isolated cottage on the outskirts of town, near the edge of the forest, supporting herself and Pearl through her skill as a seamstress, her needlework becoming so admired that it is sought after even by the very magistrates and ministers who condemn her personal conduct, an irony that townspeople never quite seem to notice. She wears the Scarlet Letter every single day, without exception, as required by law, and over the years, she gradually transforms it in the eyes of the town, not by hiding it, but by living with such quiet dignity, charity toward the poor, and patient endurance of scorn that some townspeople slowly, grudgingly, begin to reinterpret the letter A as standing for able rather than simply adulteress. Pearl herself grows into a strange, wild, and unusually perceptive child, fascinated from her earliest years by the scarlet letter on her mother's chest, at one point playfully decorating herself with green letter A shapes made from burrs while playing alone in the forest, and repeatedly asking pointed, uncomfortable questions about its meaning that Hester struggles to answer honestly. At one point, town officials, disturbed by rumors of Pearl's strange behavior and wondering whether so sinful a mother should be allowed to raise a child at all, threatened to take Pearl away from Hester and place her with a more suitably pious family. Hester, desperate to keep her daughter, appeals directly to the elderly Governor Bellingham at his mansion, and in a tense scene, Pearl is quizzed by the town's revered young minister, Arthur Dimmesdale, about her religious catechism, a scene that becomes deeply significant later since Dimmesdale, though the townspeople do not yet suspect it, is in fact Pearl's real father. Dimmesdale speaks up passionately on Hester's behalf,
arguing with surprising emotion that the child was given to her by God for a purpose and should not be separated from her mother, and his impassioned plea succeeds in convincing the governor to let Hester keep Pearl. Meanwhile, Roger Chillingworth has settled in the town as its physician and has grown steadily obsessed with uncovering the identity of Hester's former lover, correctly suspecting, based on subtle signs, that it may be the town's much-admired young minister Arthur Dimmesdale himself, who has grown increasingly pale, weak, and tormented in the years since Hester's public punishment, pressing his hand to his chest in apparent physical pain during his sermons, and confessing vaguely from the pulpit, to his congregation's great confusion and admiration, that he is a great sinner. A confession the townspeople interpret only as a sign of his exceptional humility and holiness, rather than literal truth. Chillingworth, playing the part of a concerned physician and friend, moves into lodgings in the same house as Dimmesdale in order to observe him closely, and gradually confirms his suspicions. In one particularly dramatic and chilling scene, Chillingworth quietly opens the sleeping minister's shirt while he lies unconscious with exhaustion and discovers something on Dimmesdale's chest, left carefully undescribed by the narrator but clearly connected to the same secret guilt tormenting him. And Chillingworth reacts with a horrifying expression of triumphant, almost demonic joy at having confirmed the truth at last. From this point forward, Chillingworth settles into the role of a quiet, patient tormentor, staying close to Dimmesdale under the guise of friendly medical care, while subtly needling at his conscience and deepening his suffering, feeding on the minister's guilt the way, the narrator suggests, an evil spirit might feed on a tortured soul. And Chillingworth himself grows visibly more twisted, cold, and almost inhuman in appearance as the years pass, his obsession consuming whatever decency once remained in him. Dimmesdale, unable to bear his secret guilt any longer, begins secretly torturing himself in private, fasting, keeping painful all-night vigils, and even whipping himself, all in a desperate, largely futile attempt to atone. One night, driven by a mixture of guilt and restlessness he cannot fully explain even to himself, he climbs the very same scaffold where Hester once stood years earlier, standing there alone in the darkness and crying out, imagining a public confession he still cannot bring himself to make in daylight. While he stands there, Hester and Pearl happen to pass by, returning from tending a dying man, and Dimmesdale calls out to them, and the three of them join hands upon the scaffold together for a brief moment, forming, if only in darkness and only for that instant, the family unit that the daylight world of the town has never allowed them to be. Suddenly, a strange meteor streaks across the night sky, illuminating the scene, and Pearl asks whether Dimmesdale will stand with them there openly the next day, in the daylight, before the whole town, a request the minister cannot yet bring himself to grant. As they stand there, they also notice Roger Chillingworth watching them from nearby, his face lit oddly by the meteor's glow. And Dimmesdale, sensing something deeply wrong about the man, finally confides to Hester his instinctive terror and mistrust of his supposed physician and friend.
Sometime later, Hester encounters Chillingworth by chance, and appalled by how completely he has given himself over to cruelty and revenge, finally decides to break her old promise of silence. She seeks out Dimmesdale privately in the forest, in one of the novel's most pivotal scenes, and confesses to him at last that the kindly physician living under his own roof and tending to his health is, in truth, her long-lost husband, driven now entirely by a desire for slow, secret revenge against him. Dimmesdale is horrified and shaken by the revelation, but ultimately forgives Hester for keeping the secret so long. Alone together in the forest, for perhaps the only unguarded moment they have shared in years, the two briefly and passionately discuss the possibility of fleeing the colony together with Pearl and beginning an entirely new life somewhere across the ocean, far from Chillingworth's reach and from the judgment of the Puritan community.
In a symbolic gesture, Hester unpins the Scarlet Letter from her chest and casts it away into the forest undergrowth and lets down her long hair, momentarily transformed back into the vibrant, passionate young woman she was before years of public shame wore her down, while sunlight, previously hidden by clouds, breaks through the forest canopy around them as if in blessing. Pearl, however, who has been playing nearby at the edge of a brook, does not recognize her mother in this softened, changed state, and refuses to approach until Hester, somewhat sadly, retrieves the letter and pins it back onto her dress, restoring the family's fragile, complicated balance, and quietly signaling that the escape they have just imagined may not be so easily achieved. The couple plans to secretly board a ship leaving for Europe within a few days' time, but their hopes are dashed when they learn that Roger Chillingworth has also booked passage on the very same vessel, having somehow learned of their intentions, making it clear he does not intend to release his grip on Dimmesdale so easily. Meanwhile, Dimmesdale, invigorated in an odd, almost feverish way by the secret plan and by the emotional release of his forced confession, delivers what is widely regarded as the finest and most powerful sermon of his career on Election Day, a major civic and religious holiday for the town, his eloquence and passion astonishing the entire congregation even as his physical strength visibly continues to fail him. Immediately after finishing his sermon, as the procession moves through the town square, Dimmesdale, pale, trembling, and clearly near collapse, unexpectedly turns from the procession and approaches Hester and Pearl, who are standing near the scaffold, and holds out his hand, asking them to join him there. Astonished onlookers watch as he climbs the scaffold steps with Hester and Pearl at his side, and in one final dramatic act, tears open the front of his ministerial robe before the entire shocked congregation, revealing at last on his own chest a mark said to closely resemble Hester's Scarlet Letter, physical proof of the guilt and hidden sin he has carried in silence for so many years. Having finally confessed publicly and completely, Dimmesdale collapses and dies on the scaffold in Hester's arms, seemingly at peace at last, while Pearl, in a symbolic gesture of release, kisses him for the first time. Roger Chillingworth, robbed at last of the target for his consuming revenge now that Dimmesdale has confessed and died beyond his reach, withers away and dies himself within the year, a shrunken, hollow man with nothing left to live for, though he leaves behind a substantial inheritance to Pearl, who is thereby able to leave the colony wealthy. In the story's final passages, Hester and Pearl leave the settlement for a time, and years later Hester returns alone to her old cottage near the edge of the forest, resuming her life of quiet service to the poor and the suffering, still wearing the Scarlet Letter voluntarily now, rather than by law, since by that point it has become for her less a badge of shame than a symbol of hard-won wisdom and experience earned through long suffering. Pearl herself, meanwhile, is understood to have grown up, married happily, and settled comfortably abroad, free at last from the burden that shadowed her childhood. When Hester eventually dies, she is buried near Dimmesdale's own grave, the two sharing a single tombstone marked simply with the letter A, a quiet, lasting testament to a truth publicly confessed too late, but never entirely erased.